like you, in talking to people who I know who are fans of the Blue Jays, they've never disliked the Blue Jays team more.
Yeah.
I think what it has to do with is expectations, right, versus reality, expectations versus performance. What we thought this group should be versus what they turned out to be.
Mm-hmm.
And this gets me to the Raptors because this is an interesting year for them.
Yeah.
I think the expectations for them are really low. In my opinion, probably lower than they should be, including if you want to use the real experts, Vegas odds makers. They have a number for them. I think it's like 36 and a half wins or something like that, which feels very low to me. So I wonder if the Raptors actually could flip things versus the Blue Jays in that they may perform better this year, not necessarily be a great team, but maybe a better team than people expect. And I think the pleasure of watching them could turn out to be greater than what we expect, where the Blue Jays, objectively a better team, a playoff team, like you said, was so frustrating. Do you buy my thesis at all for the Raptors that maybe they will be there? I think Raptors fans talk about this team like they're going 20-60. That's not going to happen.
It's so interesting if you go back a few years. I agree with your thesis. Go back a few years. So they win a title. Fabulous, right? The next year is the bubble year. And Pascal Siakam doesn't touch a ball for 3 months during the pandemic for reasons that have still not been fully explained. But he's terrible in the playoffs, so they barely lose to Boston. And me and a lot of people around the NBA have said since then that if Pascal touches a ball and looks like Pascal Siakam in the playoffs, they beat Boston, they beat Miami, and they probably beat the Lakers in the final. They ate the Lakers alive that year. I will go to my grave saying that was a team that could have won a second title. So then everything goes wrong. They're in Tampa for the year. They tank. They get Scotty Barnes. Fine. Then they win 48 games. Unexpected. Great. And they've had one bad year. Now, they've had guys leave over that time, but they really had one bad year in the last 5. And it's so interesting watching how Raptors fans turned. And partly it was because how they played. That was an awful team to watch last year. They had none of the admirable qualities of the team of the year before. The defense fell apart. They became, as Masai Ujiri openly said this year, a selfish team. And it wasn't even like selfish, like I'm going to get mine. It was Pascal dribbling 17 times sometimes in the second quarter and trying to figure out what to do with it, trying to figure out how to be a number one option. It was Fred trying to be Kyle, but with more shots. And so this team this year, it's interesting because they're going to be a worse shooting team than they were last year. And they couldn't shoot last year. Because Fred was their biggest volume shooter last year. He's gone. Grady Dick is going to be a good player and he's going to be a really good shooter, but he is going to take a little while to figure out the NBA. He's not going to be strong enough to start. So they got Gary Trent Jr. and they got Grady Dick who can shoot. And that's basically it at your high-end shooters from three-point range. And I still think this team is going to be way better. And not just because of the expectations of where they are, not just because they have better players than their record kind of showed last year. How they're going to play is going to be more fun to watch. Like everything that I've heard out of camp so far, and this is under Darko, who is I think a progressive coach. It's going to be ball movement. It's going to be cutting off the ball. It's going to be none of this like isolation one-on-one stuff until it really matters, unless you're punishing mismatches. The stuff in camp sounds like it's Scotty Barnes initiating a lot of the offense. It's Pascal cutting and moving and being more of that active flashing player he used to be. Jakob Poeltl is going to be really good, I think. I think this team will be more together than they were last year. And I think that alone, and probably I think the record, I think this team sneaks into the playoffs, bottom end of the playoffs. And I think they'll be better. Like people in Toronto got real used to this team being good, and they did not handle it terribly well when they got bad and didn't play in a way that was fun to watch.
Let me throw another concept to both of you. And I'm going to get people mad at me, and I don't really care because I'm old. I think both the Blue Jays fan base and the Raptors fan base are really immature. They're young. They got spoiled early. And by I say early, 2015, 2016, with the brand new Blue Jays fan base that thought, well, they always go to the playoffs, and everybody does a bat flip like Jose Bautista. And then the Kawhi year for Raptor fans, because up until that year, you know, TV ratings weren't very good. Attendance was good. It was solid. But the explosion of the fan base, because they were a championship team, brought in so many people because they love winning and they don't really understand basketball. And they don't understand the cycles of professional sports and the cycles of what goes on with a Major League Baseball team with contracts, and even more dramatic, the cycles of contracts in the NBA. So a giant part of the fan base thought, well, that we always win. We always do this. And now they're just a regular team. We had Bob Ryan on yesterday, and he talked about we're just a regular city now with the Red Sox and the Patriots. And I think there's a lot to be said that way, Bruce, for Raptor fans, because how they got so impatient so quickly, that's not a true hardcore fan. That's somebody who's in 2023 wants it now. That's not a guy who's been a long-term worried basketball fan in Southern Ontario or across the country for that matter.
Well, also, it's like taking your kid to Disneyland and your kid expects to go to Disneyland every year after that.
Right.
Because like the Kawhi trade is such an outlier in the NBA. Players decide where they play. The best players decide where they play. There's no such thing as free agency anymore in the traditional sense for the best players in the NBA. Like when Brooklyn got Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, what happened is Sean Marks got a phone call and was told they were coming.
Yeah.
Like that's how the NBA works now. So with the Raptors, since the Kawhi trade works out perfectly, right? And people forget that was not a slam dunk from the inception through the season. Like that was not a 100% thing. They had to convince Kawhi to come. Like that was a real hurdle. And since then, they have been hunting stars since Kawhi left. They've been looking to see if they can go get somebody. They were in on Durant last year. Brooklyn pulls him off the market, and then Durant tells Brooklyn, I'm going to Phoenix. I want to play with Devin Booker. They were in on Damian Lillard. And Bobby Webster said it last week that it was most aggressive they've ever been in chasing a star. And that's true, 100%. What they were talking about on the table was significant, a huge chunk of future, not present. It wasn't OG, it wasn't Pascal, it was not Scotty Barnes. They would have had all those guys. But Damian Lillard, essentially, like what made that trade happen is Damian Lillard said, I want to play with Giannis.
Yeah.
Like that. And so the Raptors are in on these and people get excited, right? It was the same thing at the trade deadline last year.
Overly excited.
They're going to trade OG. They're going to trade Pascal, right? That was the talk at the trade deadline last year, and they didn't. And so there's been all these moments where it looks like the Raptors are going to do it again in terms of making a big deal, and it hasn't quite happened. So I think that has worn on the fan base a little bit too. But the thing you got to remember is the important thing is that they're giving themselves shots, right? In these negotiations, in all these, they got to just find the right guy is what they will tell you. Whether that right guy ever comes, I don't know. But
so let me, first of all, I disagree wholeheartedly with John Shannon, and I will tell you why in a second. And I'm sort of on the same path.
We're not talking about the Knicks, okay? Or the Yankees.
I feel good. I feel good about what I'm about to say, and I'm sort of with Bruce, although I'll take it a different step. I don't consider the fan base immature at all. What I consider the Raptors fan base is young and a group that has grown up in the analytics NBA Twitter era, where they are inundated with all sorts of data points on NBA players, and they are particularly inundated on a handful of reporters who control the narrative of the league that they process all this information for. Mm-hmm. So anytime you see Adrian Wojnarowski talk about a star player who may or may not go somewhere, I think the Raptors fan base then inevitably is like, well, why don't we have a shot at this player? This gets back to what Bruce said. It's ultimately a players' league and players have to decide. So I think so much of the fan base's sort of expectations, at least this is my take, is there's in the NBA, and I think Bruce, you'll definitely agree with me, you become so convinced of the value of your players that you, I think, overvalue your players tremendously. Like, there's no doubt OG Anunoby's a tremendous player. I don't know, like, if he's really worth, like, whatever, 3 first-round picks, and the same with Pascal Siakam. Like, ultimately, like, we're not in the discussions with Masai and Bobby. We don't know what the other teams are putting out there.
Yeah.
Other teams, and I'm sure the Raptors do this too, they absolutely put fake stuff out there because they're trying to control sort of how the trade goes. The agents of the players put BS out there or try to control the narrative. So I don't see it, honestly. I don't see the Raptors fan base as immature. In some ways, I feel like it's information overload, and that they're reacting to this information overload, and maybe that skewers expectations and perception. You know, I listen to like our old, you know, John, you and me, where we used to work at Sportsnet 590. And it's a very easy thing to sort of kill Masai Ujiri, to kill Bobby Webster, that they didn't trade this guy, they didn't trade this guy. But you're working under the premise you have no idea what the other team offered or didn't offer. So, yeah, it's easy for me to say they should have traded Kyle Lowry. Definitely. Should have brought back Durant, Giannis, and Shaq from 1993 for him. Like, it's easy for me to say that, but we don't really know what's being brought back. So I think a lot of this is, again, I could be wrong about this, but it's a fan base that's young, it's diverse, it's so web and social media savvy, Bruce.
Immature. Yeah, immature.
No,
yeah.
so no, here's the thing. Here's the thing.
That's my reaction.
You're both right. I would say Richard is a little more right. because Richard's conception of the fan base is what it is there are people who grew up with this team over the last 20 years, right? And like, I've talked to people who went to the square, or went to like Jurassic Park when they were kids, and then took their kids there. So there's been a generation that's grown up, and they have an inferiority complex, to be sure, right? But it's earned to a degree because there are a lot of players who don't want to play in Canada. That's a real thing to this day. But when they win the title, there is an expansion of the fan base, and those are the ones who are immature. Those are the ones who don't get it. But the core of Raptors fandom is plugged the hell in, and to a degree that is sometimes, like, I'm not going to say unhinged, but they are a notoriously passionate fan base, and they do know.
Some are unhinged. Their expectation as to what you can get for your assets, I think, is just unrealistic.